Bună seara! Pot vorbi mai așa, da? Bună seara și bine ați venit! Good evening or good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for coming to another discussion, conversation in our usually series of conversations on Tuesday in the framework of Cover Me Softly program, the exhibition within Beta. My name is Alexandra Trofin. I am the director of this Biennale, but also today I will be speaking in my capacity of one of the contributors to the exhibition. And I will be talking today with Florencia Collo. Thank you so much for being today here with us. Florencia is part of the Atmos Lab team, the team that created climatic systems work in the room next door, which I suppose you are already familiar with, but I think it's a beautiful response to the theme, to Oana Stănescu and Chase Gallis, the curators of the exhibition, together with Simina Marin, of course, who is not present today, who tried to investigate how covers also means to work with what's already there. So to cover something is to recognize the work, the resources already there. And this is what we are going to talk about today. Welcome, Florencia.
Thank you.
I think we will start by letting you introduce a little bit your work, what Atmos Lab did during 9 years, you said already. So it's a very long-term research. And after that, I will tell you a little bit what my approach was to the exhibition and the theme, and then maybe we will start an informal conversation on the topic. So please take us through a bit what Atmos Lab does usually and what this research on both Acosta in Buenos Aires and Lacaton Vassal work deals with.
Thank you, Alexandra, for the intro. So, Atmos Lab, we started it 8 years ago, but this research has 9 years because it's a part of my personal research, the way I started to get into this topic. So I graduated as an architect, but then I studied with the two co-founders at the Architectural Association, Sustainable Environmental Design. And actually what we learned there is to cross any form of climate data with architecture and to have a critical approach about what a building can actually provide naturally. It feels that today, and it's been maybe a long time, that we completely forgot how to think without machines. We completely forgot the experience of spaces without machines and without even artificial light. So what can buildings provide on their own? Today we can know that quite precisely because we have all the climate data available, and we have building data available, and we know how to simulate that accurately because we can reproduce what happens in reality. So we try to understand actually what affects temperature inside a space, what affects light, and even if these are sometimes very simple analysis, technical analysis, they are usually carried out by engineers that are not especially sensitive to architecture and that actually think in terms of machinery again. And so what we try to do is always to think with architecture and climate and to have a very scientific approach to the topic. And actually when Oana mentioned the theme of the Biennale, I was very glad because what we realized with years of practice and years of analysis is that you can, or at least still today you can only reach architecture that is actually sensitive to the climate by repeating and by copying, because solutions are, you don't have 1,000 solutions to react to a certain climate. You have limited amount of solutions. So in the past, this was done just by trial and error. But vernacular architecture is just trial and error of using a certain type of materials that belong to the place, but that also allow you to produce a building that provides sufficiently comfortable spaces to live in. So since that master's degree at the AA, where the three co-founders of Atmos met, then we started the practice. I've been studying Vladimir Acosta. He was actually born in Odessa, but he migrated to Argentina, and in there he realized that what we were doing in Buenos Aires was just a copy of modern architecture in Europe, and it was not locally rooted. So it had nothing to do with the climate in there. And I think he was one of the very first persons to study that in a very scientific way, and in a way that which today is still relevant. And that, I think that changes everything, because a lot of people try to study that in a very technical way or scientific way, but that today is maybe it's not anymore valid, or we found ways to make it better because time passed by. But what I actually find fascinating in him is that everything he says is still valid. So this has been an ongoing research that I've been carrying out personally since 9 years, and I started teaching at the Di Tella University in Buenos Aires, and so now I do more research on him with the students in there. And then already, when we were already studying there, we met Lacaton Vassal maybe, I don't know, 7 years ago. So right after very quickly after we founded the practice. And actually everything started because I mentioned to Jean-Philippe that I had actually studied their winter garden system in Buenos Aires, and it actually didn't work. It's completely not fitted to the climate, and actually a solution like the one that Vladimir Acosta proposes, it's a lot more sensitive to the climate. So the comparison between them two is that Lacaton Vassal, they respond to a climate that is mainly cold, so you need sun to heat up. And Buenos Aires is mostly hot, so what you need is shade to protect, but still allow some sun in the winter. So it's both temperate climates, but need to be adapted to slightly different conditions. So this led us to actually start having conversations with them, starting to do competitions with them in advising them in their projects. And then one day they mentioned that they would like to do a research on their buildings that they already built, to actually understand how they behave in real life. And so we started to leave temperature data loggers, understand how the temperature behaves, and then we mimicked that in the computer, and we can actually reach an accuracy of normally 90% to reproduce the temperature from reality. And to reach that accuracy, everything needs to be working well, because if not, either temperature varies in a different way. Well, temperature will always vary in a different way, but in which way it will vary differently, it really depends on a lot of parameters. So we started to do this research on 4 of their built projects, which now will be a publication that is going out now in the next few days. And the exhibition here is a part of that publication. So, and the other way around, the publication is actually put here in a different way. So the way they deal with the winter gardens, how it replies to the climate, and how it actually performs, because something that we also realize today is that performance is not only driven by machines and by engineers, but by what calculations allow you. So it's very important to show precisely what architecture does in a scientific way, in the same way that today engineers show how machines work. So we try to push that and to always show specifically how architecture works. So I think that what we try to do here, it's about comparing the climates, it's about comparing an attitude that is a repetition in different ways in the same type of program, but in the end also very importantly showing how it performs and showing that it actually works in the climate, in both climates.
Curious, in this research over time, have you noticed any changes in the efficiency of these systems from year to year with the increasing temperatures every year? How do they respond to the newest climatic challenges that we are facing now, at least in La Caton-Vassal?
Yes, I think that, well, in the case of La Caton-Vassal, it still works. They actually evolved their system with time, but it's more via intuition and via going to their own work and asking people and actually realizing what happens. So in the 4 built works that we did, there is a clear evolution from Cité Manifeste to Orgerès to Bordeaux to the tower in Geneva. There is a clear evolution in their own way of thinking, but that was not still proved. And there is really not a big necessity to adapt such a system to a changing climate, because the changing climate is, we hope, maximum plus 1.5, 0.2. But for example, the average temperature difference between these 2 places is 5 to 6 degrees. So it's a lot more to actually have to change the attitude towards the climate. So what you need is a bit more of summer resiliency, but it's something that their system already has. So to deal with hotter temperatures, you just need to be able to deal with the summer, which their system wants. All the winter garden is open. You can actually be perfectly fine in the summer, as long as you have a shaded space with some thermal inertia to actually temper temperatures. It's fine. There is, or at least we hope that the climate doesn't change as much so as to have to completely adapt architecture. What we have to do is, especially in these kind of climates, I think that the tipping point is to try to avoid air conditioning, because it's a climate that doesn't need it initially. So if you don't provide anything, you will need it. But the moment you provide something, it's fine. And we also need to know how to adapt ourselves. It's not always about the building. We cannot ask everything to the building.
Yeah, I think that this is a game we just lost, my husband and I, personally, because this part of Romania is also on the 45 parallel, in the North Hemisphere. So the climatic situation is very similar to Bordeaux, so this kind of system should work here as well. And maybe this is how I'm going to introduce you my work. But let me tell you a little, and I said that we lost it because we just mounted air conditioning this summer because we couldn't handle it anymore, unfortunately. We tried very hard, but it was impossible. So at some point during the preparation of the Biennale, Juana, because she was extremely generous in her approach to the exhibition, and she tried to let all the contributors to continue their research or to talk about something that they already have interest in, and not to commission something particularly new. At some point, she asked us, the team, what would be our take on the Biennale team, on Cover Me Softly. And I think this was beginning of 2024. And I was extremely frustrated with the new works that just started in the apartment block in front of my house. And this is on Dragalina Street in Timișoara. So I started to document the process of the thermal rehabilitation, and the piece that you can see here is made together with Ovidiu Simcea there, our videographer and my close friend. And I will just take you a bit through. The work is called Worming from Dragalina, and it is supposed to be a note, a personal note for my community, for the local administration maybe, and also for my neighbors. Just a second. So this is Esplanada Gării in the 1960s, residential development made by a team led by Geta Mocănel Voia, a woman part of IPRO team back then, when the architecture profession was not liberal, but state-led somehow. And there are 4 apartment buildings that work beautifully together, very well designed, extremely well equipped for that period of time. And as you can see, there were not so many design elements that the architects could work with back then, because the resources were limited. The back of the building looks just as usual as any other in other residential areas. But she could work with the facade, with the entrance, with the loggias, so huge balconies, and creating this kind of rhythm on the facade. She also had some planters that she used, and maybe I'm also very attached to this project because it was designed by a woman, probably that is also something that was very special for me. So this is a picture took recently by my colleagues in Tour de Arhitectură, when it's the same as Esplanada Gării, but the way it looks today. Of course, it has been changed a lot. A lot of balconies have been glazed during the time, and the general look of the neighborhood is quite different than it was supposed to be. But the quality of living here is huge, and because it is made with concrete frames, each apartment has 3 equal partitions, and even if the apartments are quite small, the interior surface is only 45 square meters, but the length of the balcony is quite huge. It's on the whole length of the apartment, so you can actually have. Are you okay? It is so the balcony is another 12 square meters almost. So it makes a huge difference. And the beauty of this structure is that you can just have some exits from each room to have the balcony just like an extension of the interior space. So this is why we bought an apartment in this building, and at that moment, actually, we decided to open again the balcony, which was closed at the moment when we bought it, and yeah, this is our apartment, and I think it is actually this one here, or this one probably. And I wanted to do this because we could have this kind of living inside and just to use the space. And yeah, now I'm just showing my house, sorry. But in the same time, what is beautiful here is that you can have a special relationship with the neighbors across the street. And it's kind of a nice game of looking at each other, maybe a little bit just like in a user manual, a user manual a bit to try to investigate what your neighbors do. And yeah, I think I grew affectionate about the project. So this is why when they started to make the rehabilitation project, I tried to investigate it to see how just putting insulation on the facade changes the proportion of the facade, the way it is built. The reading of the facade also was completely changed. And the city hall has, just like all the other city halls in Romania, has an office that deals with thermal, or the service for efficiency, thermal efficiency in the apartment blocks, Birou de Eficientizare Termică. But unfortunately, there is no architect in this office. So even if the office and the rules are filled with the best intentions, the lack of expertise is a big problem. And in the same time, in the academia, so in the university, we don't actually do this kind of projects. We usually design something new, or maybe we work with restoration on historical buildings, but we don't really know how to approach this type of project. And I think it's a very difficult task for an architect, how to intervene on modernist architecture, but also apartment blocks from the 60s until the 80s. During the process, they decided to glaze all the loggias, actually, for the sake of unity on the facade, which, unfortunately now, if you want to live in one of these apartments, it is illegal to open it back and to have the facade as it was supposed to be, because it's already authorized and has a permit like that. And I couldn't help to document also the way that my neighbors now are very struggling with having their life in the apartments when they just gave up on a different type of living. So maybe it's not a huge difference from this state to this one, but I thought that maybe this documentation and initiative could start a dialogue, also to try to negotiate with my neighbors, that maybe this is not a goal that we want to achieve, and we can do, like we can bring the building to a thermal comfort that it's needed, of course, but with better solution than just adding some insulation on the facade. And at the same time, it would be great to have a conversation with the local administration in trying to provide better solutions. So this is why I think Lacaton and Vasal's work, given the similar circumstances and the same kind of temperatures, might be a good example to bring on the table. Okay, this is it with the presentation. I'm wondering if you can go a little bit into the legal framework that was that made possible a work like the one in Bordeaux.
Well, as a starting point, the Tower of Bordeaux was going to be demolished, and then they proposed not to demolish it and to add the Winter Garden. So I don't think it's the same legal situation as here, because they just showed that with less money they could do more space and more qualitative. So it's a completely different situation, and it's not on a main avenue, meaning that they had all the space that they wanted. And what is great in their work is that they manage to create this type of space in any context within the same climate. But I think that there are a couple of things that are very important, and it's the nuance that actually makes it relevant on one side or on the other one. So the winter gardens need to be unheated spaces. They are not heated. They are just a winter garden. It's an outdoor space. It's a better outdoor space. And in the regulations, it was labeled as such, meaning that when you actually make a building, the indoor square meters are not the same as the outdoor ones, and a winter garden is an outdoor space. So the moment your heated envelope has a line, then that's the line that has to be indoors and heated, and from that line towards the outside, you do whatever you want. It's a different situation. But now they developed all their work with that type of legal framework, but now it has changed. So the projects now will start to be very different, because now the winter gardens count as interior square meters, because the French regulations changed. Now everything that is covered up to a certain percentage is an indoor space. So I think that that's a terrible loss in terms of space and architecture, because that precisely doesn't allow you to make these intermediate spaces that are extremely rich from an architectural perspective, because there are spaces where with a lot less you can build a lot more. They're a different type of space, but it is true that the key to those spaces is that they're not heated, because the problem would be to heat up a space that is actually not ready for that, because then the amount of energy you spend is just massive. And then, for example, even in the project of Bordeaux, in the tower, the winter gardens are only towards the southern side. They are not towards the northern side. So orientation is actually how the square meters are counted is one. The heated or non-heated space is another one. If in those apartments they open the interior partition, then it becomes a mistake. It's not the same situation. Then another one is orientation. It's not the same to be towards the southern orientations or towards the northern orientations. And then even if we are in a similar latitude here, the climate can be very different. To be honest, I didn't see how the climate is here before coming, but how harsh is the winter and how harsh is the summer may determine how relevant or not something is. But if everyone tended to do an outdoor glazing, maybe it's because they lacked square meters, but maybe it's because they really needed to be more protected or to catch more the sun. So I think it should be regarded very precisely and the step by step. But I have a feeling that if we're in the same latitude and we are more continental, winters should be harsher here than in Bordeaux. And having a space like that can transform is always the best, that can adapt. And what you were mentioning regarding the thermal regulations, today it's true that most of the buildings are assessed by how you can calculate them, and that becomes a problem. That's why we try to actually calculate temperature, because if not, buildings are conceived via a system of heat loss, because it's only insulation actually prevents you from losing heat. And the very simple and early calculations were based on that. So if you only account for that, then you design your building based on that. But then how to account or not for different ways of insulating a winter garden is a different way of insulating. So you have a buffer zone. Yes, it's an alternative way. And in that sense, I guess that most of the European countries, they always have reference to the European norms. And in the European norms, there are ways to account for different types of spaces. But you just need to dig and dig and dig and dig. And very few people do, but it's the kind of work that architects require to do today to actually be able to do something different, because if not, we fall on simplistic calculations that allow to go faster. And I mean, unfortunately, it's like that. Unfortunately, most of the buildings done today are like that, and I think that as architects we have a challenge because I'm an architect myself, so I put myself in the bag of we have a challenge as the discipline has a challenge to learn again how to design with climate and to learn again these tools. It's as if we didn't know how to calculate a structure. Yes, we don't know how to do it precisely, but we need to know the basics in order, if we want to do a building that stands, or so it would be the same in this other aspect. It's just that because it's more recent, then we are still lost on how to do it, but it just has to come with time. It's also true that thermal regulations came in place since maybe in France they started in the early 2000s. I don't know when they started in different parts of the world, but not all the countries today have thermal regulations. So it's a topic that is evolving, and it's just that as architects we need to learn again. And another thing is that maybe 10 years ago we didn't have the means to know. We were subject to softwares that are opaque to what the engineers say, but it hasn't been too long since we have the tools ourselves to actually do it. But now we need to think again, now I need to learn this. It's a whole new profession that I have to learn in order to do my own profession back, but it's the way we have to do. And I think that everyone in the world is a bit blocked on how to move on, because it's topics that are recurring everywhere. How do we deal with these buildings? How do we improve the energy efficiency of these without just, without neglecting the visual aspect, without neglecting the architecture of it? It's the topic that is recurring absolutely everywhere in any project. And yes, we have to learn again.
Glazing balconies or closing the envelope in the balconies was something that I completely understood, of course. It comes from having very small interior surfaces here, and because we used to have harsher winters, not anymore. Now they are quite mild. But because the apartments are quite small and you need extra surface, we used to glaze them to win some extra surface, of course. But then we had COVID and restrictions, and we had to stay inside. So having an exterior space was something that was fantastic to have, and a pity to stay inside the walls of your house. So now I'm very, it's difficult for me to understand why after a COVID crisis or the pandemic that we had, how can we go back to that, and why don't we appreciate having exterior space in our small apartments? And maybe this is also a topic which I don't know, how do you see it, or how it is approached in the context where you worked?
I think it's absolutely fundamental. And maybe an exterior space can take many forms, because a balcony is an exterior space, but a winter garden as well. So if you open it, it's an exterior space, and this, what you're saying, tags along with the fact that today, what counts is the square meters that we build and that we're able to sell. And the moment we are not able to sell the square meters in the same way, it's very difficult to build them. Or, for example, if it would be the winter gardens of La Caton-Vassal, if the square meters don't have the quality of an interior space, then you're selling for the same price, or you have to sell for the same price something that doesn't have the same quality. So it becomes very difficult, and it's a matter of city policy as well to be able to foster these intermediate spaces. And it's very technical, but in how do you account an exterior space is the key. Because maybe if, in the case of those apartments, you have only one wall that is open, maybe it counts as an interior space. And that's terrible for for the exterior space itself, because if it counts as an interior space, then I need to set it as an interior space. So that kills it. So, but if as a city, the policy is to allow, in a way, to be honest, I am not an expert in policies, but if you allow to make exterior spaces in a certain way that you can sell it in its proper way, then that would be great. We need exterior spaces, we need intermediate spaces, because if not, it feels that it's just an envelope and that's the building, and that shouldn't be the building. We have so many amazing examples from all over history of intermediate spaces, the classical Italian galleries. There are so many intermediate spaces that are great, that actually help to control the climate, that actually are so much better to be able to temper interior spaces. We definitely need them. And that's definitely a country or city policy on how to consider them, so that architects can actually build them. And I find it very interesting also because Vladimir Acosta has a project that is very similar to this one in Buenos Aires, that it's about minimal dwelling. But because the climate is so much hotter, he says that he prefers to, so it's only one space for the entire house, and the space is transformable, meaning when he draws the plan, he makes a drawing during the day and he shows that the bed is lifted, and at night he pulls down the bed, but the balcony is there and it's big and it's generous. Because in a climate like Buenos Aires, where you have 6 months of warm climate, you need an outdoor space. And he prefers to make an outdoor space rather than a bigger indoor space. He prefers to make a building that has cross ventilation rather than a more compact building without cross ventilation, because it provides quality of life, it provides quality to the people living there. So outdoor spaces, intermediate spaces are fundamental to the quality of life, to the quality of a building, and to actually improve the energy efficiency of a building itself.
I have one more question for you, and then we can open the conversation with you. Do you think that now, given the climate change and the way the temperatures are higher and higher every summer, do you think that we will start adapting the way we design? Like maybe on the 45 parallel, we will just start to design like more in the south with different types of architecture, bigger balconies, other ways, or I don't know, what kind of adaptation in the way we design would you see?
I think that we will need more shading, definitely, maybe more balconies, definitely, but the requirement of the sun will be the same, because in countries where winters are harsher, where the dominancy is the heating demand, then you will need the same amount of sun, and you need the same amount of light inside, and so it's very rare that buildings change their shape, or that buildings change their fundamental configuration compared to what was originally done in each country. In general, what was originally done early 1900s, 1800s, it's perfect. And it still works. And for example, in Italy, in the north of Italy, they had designed windows that you could put them on and off according to the season. So if it was winter, then you had a double layer of glazing. If it was summer, then one layer you took it out and you put the shutters. So these kind of things are just perfect. And so any building that was done before we counted on mechanical systems usually worked very well. And I think that structure will have to remain the same, but to adapt, we may need more shading. We always need to count on thermal mass, meaning like here today it was 24 degrees, but inside here we never felt more than 20 because the stone, the inertia keeps you fresh. So to think again on those kind of strategies will be enough, and I think that the adaptation will just be more shading, will be just knowing how to prevail the summer and to put it in the same balance as the winter, instead of just thinking that we only use heating because the risk is to start using air conditioning, precisely. But the city structure, the building structure shouldn't change because the climate shouldn't change that much. If not, it's an infinite loop that we should avoid.
Yeah, as you can see in the whole exhibition, we looked very much the vernacular, and we tried to go back to what is already there to see what can be brought to present days and to learn from what has already been done because the systems still work. Thank you. Are there any questions from your side? Would you like, Sandra?
Maybe it's not so much a question, but more like an issue I would like to raise with everybody here. So this is not generalizing, it's maybe anecdotal, but I think that besides the economical issues you were raising with like the square meters that an investor sells, and besides the situation with the lack of storage that most of us who live in building blocks, we're well aware of that, I think there's also a strong cultural aspect to it, at least in Romania, because I feel like a lot of people they don't really use their exterior spaces that much, so they just don't feel this need, maybe except the smokers, I guess. And then there's this other, so this is one thing about the usage of balconies and kind of outdoor spaces. And then regarding the energy and thermal insulation of the building itself, one really important thing is that, kind of like you said, people are not really used to like being a bit cold in the winter or being a bit warm in the summertime, because I keep hearing on and on. We still use a lot of individual heating systems, so apartment-based ones, not apartment block. So everybody has kind of their own heating system. And people really abuse them. Like, I've heard of so many people walking in like underwear in the winter time, and it's like 30 degrees inside, and I think that's absolutely insane. I mean, it's not sustainable in any way. So there's not much a question, but I just wanted to raise the idea, like, if this happens elsewhere as well, I don't know.
Yeah, it feels that we've completely lost the sense of what energy means. It was so cheap, it was so easy to actually just pay for the heating that we could afford to do anything. And I think that it may be an issue of, okay, energy needs to cost whatever it costs, and we will take care more of it. I don't know, the issue is so cultural, as you were saying as well, that so many aspects need to be rethought and changed, and it can cover so many things but we can definitely not do is to ask everything to the building. So the building has to provide a certain level of comfort, it has to provide a certain level of insulation, but a person that is in winter 30 degrees in underwear, the building cannot do anything for it. So it's also knowing what the building can do, that it can do a lot, but what's the limit of the building itself? Because the building is not always just an energy envelope provider, you know, it's a building, it's a space. And it has so many variables to it that we need to keep them in mind. We cannot just be the providers of a thermal envelope. So there are so many topics in there, and it is true that if it's an issue of square meters, then it's again something else, but it is also very important to know how to deal with what we have. If these are the buildings that we have, well, this is it, and not to have to optimize everything in any possible way.
I also had a maybe similar question, but I think thinking about it maybe less as cultural specificity and more just about people and relationships with people in a certain way. And it was nice it was kind of nice to hear you say that you're doing all these calculations and things, but when Lacaton Vassal did the project, they were just asking people what they want in a way, and that people became a metric for making decisions, and in certain cases, I'm sure it led them in a more efficient direction, and others, I'm sure it was contradictory, or there were certain hurdles they had to overcome. And I know, Alexandra, when we had conversations early about this project, there was a dimension to it that maybe will take form in a future version of this as it continues to grow, but that would involve interviewing people in the building across the street and hearing from them, not only about how this process made them feel or the effects it had, but the kind of motivations that went into it in the first place. So I guess my question to both of you is, how do you see your work? Or, I mean, maybe that's too broad, but how do you see the work that you have in this exhibition as a way to communicate to people, to inform how they perceive these cultural differences or their own personal needs? And I think, I mean, you talk about this as a letter, so it's addressed to somebody, so that is a form of communication. And I'm particularly curious with the Atmos Labs project, data visualization is something that you have to have a particular literacy in to understand, and I'm sure your audience most of the time is architects, and in this case it's certainly broader than that as well, and there's definitely like many narrative elements that you've embedded into the installation that use the data visualization but try to overcome it in certain ways, and I'm just wondering how you think about communicating with the people that you're trying to affect beyond just architects or the people in the room right now.
I can go first. There are at least two aspects that deals with the people living in these apartments that I'm very interested in. One is I'd like to see if they are aware if their living condition got better or worse after this process, if they are struggling to clean the windows, or if they are really more comfortable now, or how will they, how the this thermal insulation will work over the years, because I'm very sure that it's just a matter of how you get used to it, and then you just go back to your normal habits. But then maybe this one is not the worst case, because it's two kinds of brown and a little bit of purple in it. But usually this type of rehabilitations of the blocks in Romania are extremely bad. They are painted in crazy colors, and they used to be known as the gray residential neighborhoods. So they also have, or they are linked, powerfully linked with cultural aspects, like in the 90s there were, the gray blocks with hip-hop culture, with bands and whatever. It had something special around the whole cultural identity of the neighborhood. And I'm very curious if people still feel that they are part of it, or if they have any type of appropriation of the apartment block or the community now that they are, I don't know, pink and purple or whatever other type of color. Or if there is still a sense of community in this type of residential apartment. So yeah, at some point I would like to continue this and to go into some interviews and conversations with them. The only thing that I could do this year was just to get involved in the homeowners association, and at least to start a conversation with my neighbors to discuss a little bit how this is not necessarily the goal that we want to go towards. And of course my neighbors perceive the building across as new, and because it is new, it is beautiful. And these are some aspects that I would like to, to have time to organize some meetings with them, to go through what comfort is, why is it beautiful, what whatever, this kind of conversation with people who are not necessarily educated in the fields of architecture or urbanism or whatever.
Yeah, I think that you've touched key point, because communication is the quest of our practice, let's say. We're not the first to do this. People have done this for a while. It's just that the way they present it is pages and pages of Excel tables. And it's completely indigestible. And so we try, for us, just the fact that architects understand what we're talking about, we are just so glad because we are, the way we've seen this before is literally pages of numbers and with lots of decimals that say nothing. So just the fact of making data clear, at least to architects, is a very important first step that we try to do, and it's a trial and error as well. And we show one thing, and this key point didn't go through, so we need to improve in here and in there. And in every work that we do, we try to improve the way we communicate, because it's very important. But at the same time, we cannot miss the scientific aspect of it, because there are also so many people trying to say, oh, this works because I say it, or because I show you with an arrow that the wind comes from here to there, but it actually doesn't. So actually keeping the balance of precision and how things actually are and making it clear is a very difficult task. And we're not graphic designers, we're just architects that are trying to understand engineering, so communication becomes another point that we try to incorporate, yes, but it's really making our best, you know, and trying and trying and trying, but it's a really key aspect. How you can actually tell something or not, it changes everything. But for us it's very important that to be readable, but not to lose the scientific credibility of it, and it's our permanent quest.
Do you work with graphic designers to make it like more infographics?
Yes, we do have graphic designers that helped us the first time to build up everything, that they are called Zaina, that they are great. But we don't work with them on a daily basis, because day-to-day is just a rush of life, and we just need to go and go and go. But we hope that we can go back. Now that we started at the beginning with them, now that it's been many years that we collected information, we are planning to go back to them and tell them, how can we improve again? But yes, it's a permanent quest.
You had a question?
It was really interesting to hear that here in Romania, the apartments are individually heated, or you could regulate it. Where I'm from in Lithuania, the residential districts are all on a centralized system, and so there's a date, they turn it on, and a problem that we see there often is they kind of base it off of the first floor, because they're usually freezing, and then the heat rises and the people on the 12th floor are walking around in their underwear in 30 degrees. And so a lot of the solutions that we see kind of always, oftentimes kind of talk horizontally in the apartment, kind of how the heat would go in or out this way, but I'm kind of curious if there's any solutions or any investigations about how to work when the heat kind of in a more vertical way through the building. Yeah,
it's a very common problem that we also find when we do research in existing buildings or in recently built buildings. Actually, from the 4 case studies of La Vassal, the one that is in Paris, that is called Haute Jaurès, has a central heating, and is the one where we took the temperature measurements that we took. They were in December, and in plain winter, we had in between 24 and 26 degrees inside, which is just crazy. It's a summer temperature. And it was because it was a central heating system, and actually when we asked people, do you use the winter garden, they were the ones using it the less. So any passive system works a lot less because they just have whatever that is. So any system that is the building itself works less the moment the heating is central. So it has so many drawbacks. But yes, it was ways of thinking before. Now it's just a matter of understanding it, of exposing it, of talking again and seeing how to change it. But it's a very classic problem.
In our apartment block is still centralized. Actually, I think it's for the whole neighborhood, right? Or not only for my building, but for the all four. And it works quite. I think it works quite great. It's a very comfortable temperature. There are some dates, so it's ruled by the city, and it starts in one specific day when it's cold enough. I didn't really have, I think at some point during our renovation in the apartment, we just said that we don't need one extra heater, for example. We just gave up because it's very comfortable. And also what works very nice is the shading and the way, so our apartment is facing southwest, mostly west, but southwest. And the floor is continuous, so on the balcony it heats during winter, and that also heats a little bit the apartment. Of course, in the summer it's too hot, but for the winter it works very, very well. Are there any other questions? No? Can you tell us a little bit more on the book and how was the process of doing it? What's the plan with it?
Yes, so we, since 2018, we've been living temperature data loggers in these 4 buildings of them. So it's one in Cité Manifeste, that is in Mulhouse, that is close to Germany. One in Bordeaux, so southwest of France, one in Paris, and one in Geneva in Switzerland. And after leaving data loggers, talking to the people, we understood how the buildings behave in reality. And then we mimicked that behavior in the computers to try to afterwards extrapolate the behavior in a full year. And what is interesting is that it's 4 case studies with winter gardens that are very different. So the first ones are just row houses with a big space that is a winter garden. The second one is just a building in the middle of the city. That is the one in Paris with winter gardens. The third one is the transformation, the Bordeaux one. And the last one in Genève is a tower where there are winter gardens in all the orientations. So how they behave in the different orientations is different. And we, throughout the book, so at the beginning of the book, like at Vassal, they explain their story with the winter gardens. Then they have I think it's a conversation in between them and with Ilka, Ruby, and then there's also a conversation with the engineer that calculated originally the projects for them. So they explain how they moved from their intuition towards understanding more and more with time with what they implied, what winter gardens implied scientifically and from an actual physical perspective. So they did this with time and with their work, and as tools were even more available. So it's all that historic part from them, how winter gardens actually behave technically. And then it's the 4 case studies that are the core part of the book. We explain how do they work regarding daylight, regarding the sun, how they are oriented, what are the technical aspects of each of the layers. And in the end, we show the thermal performance, meaning what's the temperature naturally in those buildings all over the year, and in the end, what's the heating demand, meaning what the space is required to be heated up to what the regulations require, or more or less. So it's a full review of how their 4 case studies perform environmentally, and that's all. It's all the book. It's, I think, 260 pages, something like that, and I think that 200 are the analysis. So it's commenting on the analysis and explaining how each space behaves. And then what is very interesting also is that all the case studies have a comparative situation. For example, in the Bordeaux case study, we have what was the performance of the building before the intervention, what would have been a standard renovation, meaning the same building as before, but with insulation, what would be done in a standard situation, just insulating, just putting a more performative double glazing, and how does it compare to a solution with the winter gardens? And I can spoil it, the winter gardens are better. And then, for example, another one is the Genève Tower, where there are winter gardens in all the orientations, and we compare it to what would happen with a triple glazing instead of the winter garden. Again, the winter gardens are better, but they have to be done in a very specific way so that they are better. It's not just that winter gardens are better. It's that the way they did it is better than what it would be. So it's interesting also to see these comparative scenarios that we chose, because it actually explains a lot better how they work. And that's the content of the book. It's really the technique, the history of their winter gardens, why they started to work with that, and the technical resolution, and how they perform in reality.
I'm still amazed by how big the echo of this project, but also their work usually in the winter garden study is. Like, Ilka Ruby was the curator of the biennial in 2020, and of course Lacaton and Vassal was part of the exhibition back then also, and over these years it just didn't stop to have attention on it, because of course it's remarkable. How, now that the book is done, what are your future plans? Where this research is finished at this moment? Will you continue to add data or to follow the project over the future years?
I think that we are interested in continuing the research. There are many ways to enlarge it. We are still discussing it because now the book is just done. So we've just had some conversations about it. We know that from now onwards the question will be about carbon, but there are many issues to it that I see. First is that the buildings were not thought in terms of carbon, they were thought in terms of climate, so it makes no sense to point at something that for what they were not thought from that perspective. And the other problem with carbon is that to actually assess carbon, you need to put a lifespan to the building. You need to decide that the building will be demolished in 50 years, or because to be able to compare what a building uses in terms of operational energy with its embodied materials, then you need to put an ending to the embodied materials. And that is a huge problem to me, because you cannot, if you design a building for 50 years, we are in a problem. But that's how most of the evaluation methods are today. So I think that it's a lot more important that a building works climatically first, and then to see what happens with the materials. But we definitely need to put the accents in the operation of the building. So we know that there will be something regarding carbon to do. There is a lot. We didn't push too much the daylight research, but it's a topic that we are also very interested in carrying forward. and also other programs, because up until now we only saw residential programs, and they have buildings with many other types of programs, buildings that we're doing together with other types of programs. So, and we are also thinking of maybe doing an exhibition based on it. So yes, there will be more research to do, but we still don't know in which direction.
Great, thank you so much. If there are no other questions, then we will wrap it up. Thank you for coming. And yeah, we can continue to discuss downstairs. Thank you for documenting us, Ovidiu. Bye.
Thank you.